right, bitch. That's what Cadet Marcus Brennan whispered before he shoved her off the rooftop of Malvesti Hall. His hands flat against her chest, his eyes cold, his smirk wide. He didn't even wait to see if she screamed. He just walked away laughing, assuming she was done. Assuming she was nothing. Assuming she would fall. He was wrong about every single thing. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Watch until the very end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. And drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The morning Lieutenant Raina Thorne arrived at Fort Benning. Nobody noticed her right away. That was exactly how she wanted it. She drove herself in, no escort, no fanfare, just a government-issue sedan, a duffel bag in the back seat, and a black coffee in the cup holder that had gone cold somewhere around Columbus. She pulled into the visitor's lot, checked her reflection once in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the Georgia heat like it owed her nothing. She was 38 years old, 5'7", 142 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painted on. She wore no rank on her civilian clothes, no patches, no insignia. Just dark slacks, a gray button-down, and boots that had walked through things that would have broken most people in half. Nobody at the gate gave her a second look. One MP checked her credentials, handed back her ID, and waved her through without a word. She liked that. She liked invisible. The evaluation was supposed to last 3 weeks. She had been sent by Naval Special Warfare Command in an inter-service advisory capacity tasked with reviewing the Army's Ranger training program at the request of the Joint Chiefs. It was a joint modernization study, classified at the operational level. The base commander, Colonel James Whitaker, knew why she was there. His staff did not. And the cadets in the training cycle she was assigned to observe, they had been told exactly one thing, that a female officer from the Navy was coming to watch their program. That was all. She found Colonel Whitaker in his office at 0730. He stood when she entered, which she appreciated. He was a big man, late 50s, with a kind of posture that told you he had earned every inch of that chair the hard way. "Lieutenant Thorne," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Benning." "Colonel," she shook it once firm. "Thank you for having me." He gestured to the chair across from his desk and she sat. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, which she also appreciated. "I want to be straight with you," Whitaker said, folding his hands on the desk. "My staff is going to know you're here. The cadets are going to know you're here. What they're not going to know is your full background. I've kept that in a need-to-know box per your command's request." "That's the arrangement," Raina said. "It's going to create friction," Whitaker said. "These are Ranger candidates, alpha personalities. Some of them have been grooming for this their whole lives. They're going to see a Navy woman walking around their program, and they're going to have opinions." "I'm counting on it," Raina said. Whitaker studied her for a moment. He had read her file. The real file, not the redacted version that would make its way into the base's administrative records. He had read about Fallujah, about the operation in 2009 that nobody talked about in public, about the Silver Star she had earned in a country whose name still couldn't appear in print next to hers without clearance. He looked at her now and tried to reconcile the quiet woman sitting across from his desk with what he had read, and he found that he couldn't quite do it, not because she seemed weak, but because she seemed so utterly, completely calm. "Is there anything you need from me?" he asked. "Just access," she said. "And space. I want to observe their training cycles. PT classroom, field exercises. I won't interfere unless I see something that rises to a reportable level." "Understood." He paused. "One more thing. There's a cadet in this cohort. Brennan, Marcus Brennan. His father was Lieutenant Colonel David Brennan, 75th Ranger Regiment, KYA in Afghanistan 2014. Raina's jaw didn't move, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I know who David Brennan was," she said. "I figured. His son idolizes him. The whole program knows who the kid's father was. He's talented, Thorne, genuinely talented. But he's got something in him that worries me, and I haven't been able to put my finger on it. I thought you should know." She nodded once. "I'll keep that in mind." She left his office at 800 and made her way to the observation area for the morning physical training formation. 43 cadets in the cycle. She stood off to the side with a clipboard and watched them fall in. She spotted Brennan immediately. Not because she was looking for him, because he was the kind of person a room organized itself around whether you wanted it to or not. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and the easy confidence of someone who had never really failed at anything physical in his life. He had his father's jaw, strong and square. But where David Brennan's eyes had been careful, watchful, always measuring, Marcus Brennan's eyes were performing. Even in a formation of 43 men, he was performing. He was talking to the cadet next to him low and sideways, the way soldiers talk when they think a cadre member isn't watching. The other cadet laughed. Then Brennan's eyes drifted across the PT field and landed on Raina. He looked at her the way a lot of men looked at her when she showed up in places like this. like she was an administrative error, like someone had sent the wrong package and hadn't figured it out yet. His lip curled just slightly and he leaned back to the cadet beside him. She couldn't hear what he said. She didn't need to. She wrote nothing on her clipboard. She just watched. The cadre ran the morning PT session hard. 6 miles of interval runs, obstacle rotations, and a finishing circuit that left half the class bent over with hands on knees. Raina stood at various points around the course and observed without expression. A few cadets glanced at her as they passed. Most looked away quickly. Brennan was the only one who made eye contact and held it. He did it on the 4th lap, running hard, not even breathing heavy. Looking straight at her with something on his face that wasn't quite contempt, but was neighbors with it. She held his gaze until he passed. She wrote nothing. After PT, the cadets moved to the classroom building for a morning session on small unit tactics. Raina sat in the back of the room. The instructor, a staff sergeant named Ortega, ran a tight session. Good energy. The cadets were sharp in here too. Mostly, there was a low current of distraction toward the back left corner where Brennan had positioned himself with 3 of his regular satellites. Cadet Joey Vance, big and broad, with a habit of laughing too loud at everything Brennan said. Cadet Derek Chu, quieter but watchful in a way that made Raina note him separately. And Cadet Liam Haas, a second year with a disciplinary flag already in his file for a confrontation with a female instructor 6 months ago. She had read all their files before she arrived. She watched them more than she watched Ortega. About 40 minutes into the session, Ortega asked a question about a tactical dilemma involving a compromised extraction point. He opened it to the class. Brennan's hand went up before the question was fully out of the man's mouth. Cadet Brennan, Ortega said. Brennan stood with its particular ease of someone who loves being called on. Sir, in that scenario, the element leader makes the call to redirect to the alternate LZ and accepts the time cost. You don't sacrifice your whole team to protect an asset that's already burned. Simple. Walk me through the calculation, Ortega said. Asset value versus human capital. You can rebuild an intelligence source. You can't rebuild a man. He paused for effect. Or so I've heard. There was a ripple of laughter from the back left corner. A few more cadets smiled. Ortega let it go. Raina wrote one word on her clipboard. She wrote performed. After the session broke, the cadets filtered out into the hallway. Raina stood near the door reviewing her notes. She didn't look up when she heard them coming. So that's her, she heard Vance say. Not quietly, not trying to be quiet. That's her, Brennan confirmed. What's she evaluating exactly? Whatever they need, a reason to check a diversity box. Brennan's voice was casual, almost bored. They pull a female officer from some desk job, give her a clipboard, and call it a joint program review. It's optics. Raina didn't look up. She looks like she works in HR, Vance said and laughed. She probably does. Brennan's voice was right beside her now. He slowed down. She could feel him stop. Morning, Lieutenant, he said loud enough that the hallway heard it. She looked up, kept her face neutral. Cadet, getting what you need. He nodded at her clipboard with a smile that was technically polite. Technically. Making progress, she said. Great. He held the smile a second longer than necessary. Let us know if you need anything explained. He walked away. Vance laughed. Chu watched her from down the hall with those quiet, careful eyes. Haas didn't look at her at all, which was his own kind of statement. Raina watched them go. She wrote one more word on her clipboard. She wrote patience. The second day was worse. That was expected. The first day was always reconnaissance. The second day was when they started probing. She arrived at the morning formation to find that someone had taped a printed sheet of paper to the observation post fence. It was a printout of what appeared to be an organizational chart, and in the box where a person of her approximate description would appear, someone had typed decorative consultant. A few of the cadets were watching to see her reaction. She unclipped the paper from the fence, folded it neatly, and put it in her clipboard. She didn't say anything. She didn't look for the person responsible. She just turned back to the formation like nothing had happened. She heard very clearly someone behind her exhale in disappointment. They had wanted a reaction. She had filed that information away along with the paper. That evening, she sat alone in the small officers' quarters they had given her, eating a meal from the base cafeteria and going through her observation notes. Her room was sparse. A cot, a desk, a window that looked out at the parade ground. She had unpacked exactly one personal item. A photograph no larger than a playing card, which she placed face down on the corner of the desk. She didn't look at it while she worked. She had been in rooms like this for more of her adult life than she had been anywhere else. Different countries, different bases, different conflicts. The sameness of it was almost comforting. The particular quality of fluorescent light on institutional walls. The distant sound of someone's boots on a concrete corridor. She pulled up the personnel file for Marcus Brennan on her secure laptop and read it again. Not the disciplinary record, which was nearly clean. Not the performance metrics, which were genuinely impressive. She read the personal history section. David Brennan killed in action September 17th, 2014, during a direct action raid in Kunar province. Marcus Brennan had been 19 years old. He had been a sophomore at Georgia Tech. He had dropped out within a semester of his father's death and enrolled in officer candidate school. She closed the file. She thought about David Brennan for a moment. She had not known him personally, but she had been in theater at the same time. She had heard his name spoken the way good soldiers' names get spoken, with weight, with respect, with the particular reverence that men reserve for other men who did the job right and paid for it completely. She wondered what David Brennan would think of what his son had become, or more accurately, what his son was in the process of becoming, because Raina had seen this before, had seen the sons of great men buckle under the weight of that greatness, had seen them go one of two ways. Either they grew something real and became their own kind of great, or they performed greatness so relentlessly that they forgot the performance was the problem. Marcus Brennan was performing. She was sure of it. The question was whether there was something genuine underneath it, whether there was a real soldier in there waiting for someone to stop applauding long enough for him to find out who he actually was. She didn't have 3 weeks to find out, but she had 3 weeks to observe. And that would have to be enough. On the third day, they escalated. She was in the middle of a field navigation observation when it happened. The cadets had been split into 4-man teams for a compass and terrain exercise in the wooded training area east of the main compound. Raina was moving between teams, observing decisions and timing. She was alone in a stretch of woods between Team 2 and Team 3 when she heard them behind her, 3 of them. She had heard them before she saw them, which was itself a statement because she had been trained to hear things that most people's brains filter out entirely. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were trying to be casual. The footsteps said intimidation, not stealth. She kept walking. She didn't slow down. Lieutenant Thorne, Brennan's voice came from about 10 feet back. Hold up. She stopped. She turned around. Brennan, Vance, and Haas, not Chew. She noted the absence. Brennan had his thumbs in his belt and that performance smile on his face. You're off the marked observation path, he said pleasantly. I'm observing, she said. Sure, but the cadre marked the observation corridor pretty clearly. You're about 40 meters outside it. She looked at him. I appreciate the concern. Just don't want you to get lost out here. Vance snorted. Brennan's smile didn't change. Woods can be confusing if you're not used to them. I'll manage, she said. She turned to continue walking. She heard Haas say something under his breath. She didn't catch the exact word, but she caught the shape of it, and the shape was ugly. She filed it, continued walking, and did not look back. That evening, she wrote 3 things in her observation log. She wrote coordinated. She wrote escalating. She wrote Haas is the unstable variable. She also placed a call to her contact at Naval Special Warfare Command, not to report an incident, not yet, just to confirm that her timeline and communication protocol were still in place. You doing okay out there? Her contact asked. His name was Commander Ray DeLuca, and he had known her for 15 years. I'm fine, she said. You sure? Because your voice gets a specific kind of flat when you're not fine. I'm observing. Uh-huh. A pause. Raina, these are kids. They're adults in a military training program with weapons certifications, she said. But I hear you. I know what you mean, Ray. She kept her voice even. I'm not going to break anybody unless I have to. You know that. Another pause. Yeah, he said, I know that. That's not actually what I'm worried about. Then what are you worried about? The silence on the line was the kind that old friends make when they're deciding whether to say the hard thing. I'm worried about you being out there for 3 weeks with a bunch of young soldiers who don't know what you've been through and who don't know what they're actually dealing with. And I'm worried about what that does to you, not to them. She looked at the photograph on the desk, still face down. Go home, Ray, she said softly. I'll file my first week report on schedule. She ended the call. She sat in the silence for a moment. Then she turned the photograph face up. It was a team photo, 8 people in tactical gear, somewhere hot and dusty, squinting into the sun. She was one of them. Third from the left, younger. Her face still had that specific kind of brightness that you see before certain things happen to people, before certain nights. 3 of the 8 people in that photograph were still alive. She was one of them. She turned it face down again. She had work in the morning. By the end of the first week, the harassment had a rhythm to it. Brennan was the architect. Vance was the muscle and the loudmouth. Haas was the edge case, the one she couldn't quite predict. And she had revised her read on Shu. He wasn't a participant, but he wasn't stopping anything either. He watched with those careful eyes and said nothing, and silence in these situations was its own kind of choice. The pattern went like this morning, some small, calculated insult designed to provoke a reaction. Something she could technically report, but technically couldn't quite prove was intentional. Midday, a public moment where Brennan would find a way to position her as incompetent or out of place in front of other cadets, phrased so politely that it would sound professional on a recording. Evening, a quieter kind of pressure. Something personal left where she would find it. Her vehicle rekeyed so her fob wouldn't work. A note under the door of her quarters. She didn't read the notes. She bagged them and logged them as evidence and left them in the bottom of her duffel. What they didn't understand was that they were not the first people to run a psychological operation against Raina Thorne. They were not the 10th. They were running it with the tools of boys who had read about pressure tactics in textbooks. She had been on the receiving end of pressure tactics in places where the stakes were not a training evaluation, but her actual survival. She had been in rooms in countries she couldn't name in polite company where very dangerous and very experienced people had tried to break her. Not with notes under a door, not with organizational chart printouts, with the full machinery of human cruelty applied by professionals. She had not broken. She had come out the other side of those rooms changed, scarred in ways that didn't always show, carrying weight that never fully lifted. But she had come out. She was still here. These Maz and their clipboard jokes and their whispered comments didn't even register as pressure. They registered as information. Data about who they were and what they were made of, and that body was not encouraging. On the 8th day, something shifted. It started with a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She was in the equipment room after a training cycle logging some gear observations when Brennan and Vance came in through the side entrance, not knowing she was there. She didn't move. She stayed behind the shelving unit and listened. "We need to actually do something," Vance said. "The clipboard thing isn't landing. She doesn't react to anything." "I know," Brennan said. His voice was different in here, less performance, more something else. "Haas wants to push it further. He's got something in mind for the night nav." "What kind of something?" "He wouldn't say exactly, but he said it would make a point." There was a pause. Raina didn't breathe. "She's just sitting there every day writing stuff down," Vance said. "It's starting to get weird, man. Like she's not scared of us at all. You ever get the feeling she knows something we don't?" "She's a desk officer from Coronado," Brennan said. But his voice had something in it now. Not quite doubt, but something adjacent to doubt. Something that knew doubt was in the neighborhood. "Then why doesn't she react?" Vance said. "Normal people react." Silence. "Just leave it to Haas," Brennan said finally. "Night nav exercise is in 4 days. We'll see what he's got." They left. Raina waited 60 seconds, then stepped out from behind the shelving unit. She stood in the empty equipment room and thought carefully about what she had just heard. She could escalate to Whitaker right now. She had enough documentation. The notes, the organizational chart, enough pattern evidence to flag this as a hostile conduct situation and shut the whole thing down before it went further. She stood there a long time thinking about that, about what it would mean, about what it would resolve and what it would leave unresolved, about Marcus Brennan in a team photo with 8 people in it and 3 who were still alive. She didn't go to Whitaker, not yet. She went back to her room, she sat at her desk, she opened her laptop and she started writing a very different kind of evaluation. One that was still technically about the Ranger training program, but that had at its center one specific cadet, and a question about whether what was broken in him could still be fixed, and whether she was the right person to be in the room when that happened. She didn't know the answer yet. She suspected she was about to find out. Night navigation exercise in 4 days. She made a note of it. She checked her gear, her boots, her hands. She stretched her right shoulder, where the scar tissue sometimes tightened in the Georgia heat. She had been pushed off worse things than a rooftop in her life. She had survived worse nights, worse hands, worse intentions. She had come home from places that didn't exist officially. She had buried teammates whose names were carved somewhere that most people would never visit. She was not afraid of Cadet Haas and his plan, whatever it was. She was not afraid of Marcus Brennan. She was not afraid of any of them. But she was paying attention. Every single second she was paying attention. And that was the thing they would never understand about her until it was too late. That while they were planning what to do to her, she was already 3 moves ahead of where they thought she was. That stillness they read as weakness was not weakness at all. It was Raina Thorne doing what she had always done in every dark place she had ever been put. Waiting. 4 days. That was all the time she had. Raina spent the first of those 4 days doing exactly what she had been doing since she arrived at Fort Benning. She showed up, she watched, she wrote things down on her clipboard, and she said very little to anyone, and she let them believe what they wanted to believe about her. But something had changed in the way she moved through the base. It was subtle, invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. She began timing things differently. She noted exit points. She paid attention to which cadets walked, which routes after evening, chow, and at what times. She stopped sitting with her back to open spaces. Old habits. The kind of habits that don't come from a training manual. The kind that come from years of living inside situations where paying attention was the difference between going home and not going home at all. On day 9, Cadet Derek Chu found her. She was in the small rec room off the West Corridor, alone reviewing notes on her laptop. She heard the door and looked up. Chu stood in the doorframe in civilian clothes, off-duty hands in his pockets. He looked like he was deciding something. "You got a minute," he said. She closed the laptop. "Sit down." He sat across from her at the small table. He didn't say anything right away. He was the kind of person who needed a moment to arrange his words before he let them out. She waited. "I'm not part of whatever they're planning," he said finally. "I want you to know that." "Okay," she said. "I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't know something was happening, because that would be a lie, and I don't do well with lying." He looked at the table. "But I didn't have specifics until this afternoon." She kept her voice level. "And now you have specifics." He looked up. "Haas has been talking to Brennan and Vance since yesterday. I caught a piece of it. The night nav exercise. Thursday. They're planning something on the rooftop of Malvesti Hall. That's where the final checkpoint is." "I know where the final checkpoint is," she said. Chu nodded. He looked uncomfortable, which meant he was honest, which meant she could use this. "I don't know exactly what they're going to do," he said. "Haas has said some things that are—" He stopped, exhaled. "Haas has a problem. A real one, not a discipline problem. An actual problem with women in positions of authority. It goes further than just talking trash." "I know about the incident with the female instructor," Raina said. Chu blinked. "You read his file?" "I read all your files before I got here." He stared at her for a moment. Something shifted in his face, not surprise exactly, more like the dawning of something he hadn't considered before. "Why would you read our files?" She didn't answer that. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked instead. He was quiet again. She let the silence sit. "Because my father spent 22 years in the Marine Corps," he said. "And if he ever found out I watched something bad happen to a woman in uniform and didn't say anything, he would never look at me the same way. And I care more about that than I care about whatever Brennan thinks of me." He paused. "That's the honest answer." She looked at him for a long moment. "Does Brennan know you're here?" "No." "Are you going to tell him a no?" She picked up her pen. "Go back to your quarters, Cadet Chu. Get some sleep. Perform normally through Thursday. Don't change anything about your behavior around Brennan or the others." He hesitated. "Are you going to be okay?" She almost smiled. "Go to bed, Cadet." He stood. He got to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "whatever's in your file, I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure Brennan doesn't know what he's dealing with." "Nobody ever does," she said. "That's all right. Good night." He left. She sat alone in the quiet and thought about a Marine Corps father who had raised a son with enough integrity to walk into a room like this and say what Chu had just said. She thought the Marine Corps father would be proud if he knew. She thought about her own father for exactly 3 seconds, and then she put that away because it was not useful. She opened her laptop. She wrote one sentence in her observation log. She wrote, "Chu is the real thing." Then she began to plan. Day 10 was Thursday. The night navigation exercise was scheduled for 2100 hours. All 43 cadets, 4-man teams compass, and terrain final checkpoint at Malvesti Hall rooftop. She had 48 hours. She used them carefully. She placed 2 calls, one to Commander DeLuca, one to a number that didn't appear in her contact list, but that she had memorized the way you memorize things that matter. She was brief on both calls. She said she needed a protocol, confirmation, and a timing window. She got both. She ate dinner alone on day 11 in the officer's mess and was almost finished when Brennan sat down across from her uninvited. She looked up. She said nothing. He set his tray down like he owned the table, which was she had come to understand exactly how Marcus Brennan moved through every space he occupied, like he owned it, like ownership was something that happened automatically when you arrived somewhere. "Mind if I sit?" he said, already sitting. "You're already sitting," she said. "True." He picked up his fork, took a bite. Casual, theatrical. "How's the evaluation going?" "Fine," she said. "What are you actually looking at, if you don't mind me asking?" "I do mind," she said pleasantly. He smiled at that, a genuine one almost. She noticed it and filed it. Under the performance and the arrogance, there was an intelligence that he was wasting burning up in service of an image instead of anything real. She could see it most clearly in moments like this one, when something surprised him just enough that the performance slipped for half a second. "Fair enough," he said. "Look, I want to apologize." She waited. "The first week, some of the guys were out of line. I should have reined it in." He said it smoothly, too smoothly. The words were right, but the delivery was a rehearsal. "You're a guest at this installation, and you deserve to be treated professionally." She picked up her coffee, took a sip, put it down. "That's very gracious, Cadet Brennan." "I mean it." "I believe you think you do," she said. The smile tightened slightly. "What does that mean?" She looked at him directly, not aggressively, just directly, the way she had looked at people in rooms far more dangerous than this cafeteria, the way she had learned to look when she needed someone to understand she was completely entirely present. "It means that what you're doing right now has a specific name. And I've seen it done better. She set down her coffee. Enjoy your dinner, cadet. She picked up her tray. She left. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard him set his fork down hard. Not a slam, just hard enough. She filed that too. Thursday morning arrived like a slow exhale. The day ran its normal rhythms. PT classroom, afternoon fieldwork. Raina moved through all of it at the same pace she had maintained since day one. She watched Haas more than usual. He was wound tight. The kind of tight that looks like composure from a distance, but vibrates at close range. He avoided looking at her, which was different from his usual pattern of calculated indifference. Avoidance was anticipation. He was waiting for tonight. Vance was doing a bad job of pretending to be normal. He laughed too much and too loud at lunch, the way nervous people perform relaxation over-calibrating. She noted it. Brennan was the opposite. He was quieter than usual. She caught him looking at her twice during the afternoon session. Not the mocking look, not the performance look. Something else. Something she couldn't entirely read, which was interesting because she was usually very good at reading people. She wondered if their conversation in the cafeteria had done something to him, planted something. She didn't know yet. Chu was steady. He performed normally exactly as she had asked. He didn't look at her once all day, which was perfect. At 20:30, the cadets geared up for the night nav. Raina checked her own kit. Her gear was civilian, no uniform items. She had dressed practically from the beginning of the assignment, always in boots, always in layers that allowed movement. She wore a long-sleeve shirt that night that covered both forearms. She noted the temperature. She noted the cloud cover. She noted that there was no moon. At 20:50, she walked to Malvesti Hall alone and took the interior stairs to the roof. She was not supposed to be there yet. The cadets were routed through a course that would bring the first teams to the rooftop checkpoint around 21:45. She had 55 minutes. She used 20 of them to walk the roof quietly and carefully. She noted the surface, the edges, the height. She noted the access door and the positions of two ventilation units that created natural lines of shadow and cover. She noted the southern parapet wall, which was lower than the others by about 8 inches. She positioned herself near the checkpoint station on the north end of the roof, and she waited. They came at 21:47. She heard them before the roof door opened. 4 sets of boots on the concrete stairs, moving faster than a team completing a nav course would normally move. They weren't tired. They weren't rushing to beat a time. They were eager. She recognized the sound of eager. She had heard it before in context that had ended very badly for someone. The door opened and Brennan came through first, then Vance, then Haas, then a 4th cadet she recognized as a second-year named Porter, who she had not previously flagged as part of Brennan's intergroup. She noted him immediately. He was hanging back slightly, reluctant. Good. Brennan saw her, and for a single instant, just one fraction of a second, he looked surprised, like he hadn't expected her to already be there. Then the performance came back up, and he walked toward the checkpoint station like this was normal. "Lieutenant Thorne," he said, "didn't expect you up here tonight." "Part of the observation schedule," she said. Vance moved around to her left. Slow, not quite casual. Haas moved to her right and didn't stop at a conversational distance. He stopped at a different kind of distance. She tracked all of them in her peripheral vision simultaneously without moving her head. "Cold night to be on a rooftop," Brennan said. He was still moving toward her, slowly. "I've been on rooftops in worse weather," she said. "I bet you have." Something changed in his voice. The pleasant surface cracked just slightly. Not all the way, but enough that she heard what was underneath it. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about doing something better." "Have you?" she said. "Yeah." He was close now, about 4 feet. Vance was 5 feet to her left. Haas was 4 feet to her right, and his hands had come out of his pockets. "I think you were talking about us, about what we've been doing." He tilted his head. "Have we been bothering you, Lieutenant?" "You've been providing valuable observational data," she said. Vance laughed. The laugh had a sharp edge. Porter behind them all had not moved forward. She noted it again. Smart kid or scared kid, maybe both. "See, the thing is," Brennan said, and his voice dropped, the performance stripped away now down to something much more direct and much less polished. "You showing up here has been a problem, not because of what you are, but because of what you represent. They're using you as a reason to change a program that has worked for decades. To add requirements, change standards, adjust things, and that pisses people off." "I imagine it does," she said. "So this is just," he spread his hands, "a message, that's all. Nothing personal." Haas moved. He was fast. She had clocked him as fast from his physical evaluations. He came from her right with both hands extended, and she rotated a quarter turn and let his momentum carry past her left shoulder so that his hands caught air instead of her. And he stumbled 2 steps forward into the space she had just occupied. Vance was already moving from the left, and she stepped into him instead of away, which was not what he expected, which put her inside his reach before he could use it. And she put one hand flat on his sternum and shoved hard, redirecting his weight backward. He sat down on the roof hard enough to knock the air out of him. Haas recovered. He was fast and he was angry, and those two things combined are dangerous, and she was already calculating the next 4 seconds when Brennan hit her from behind. He was stronger than she had estimated. He had the weight, the leverage, and the pure physical force of a man who had been training his entire life to be exactly this, and both of his hands caught her between the shoulder blades with full force, and she went forward. She went over the parapet, the southern parapet, the one that was 8 inches lower than the others. For one moment, there was nothing but air. Her hands caught the ledge on pure reflex. The kind of reflex you don't think about, because if you think about it, you're already dead. Both hands' fingers locked over the concrete edge, body swinging out over 4 floors of nothing, Georgia night air below her boots. She heard Vance on the roof above, saying something high and breathless. She heard Haas make a sound she could not interpret. She heard Porter say very quietly, "Oh my God." And she heard Brennan step to the edge and look down at her hanging there. And she heard him say it, low and clear and terrible. "Die, bitch." Then he turned away. She hung there for exactly 3 seconds. Her shoulders burned. The scar tissue on her right deltoid pulled the way it always pulled, into her maximum load, the reminder of a night in a country she couldn't name that had taken a piece of her she would never get back. She breathed. She breathed the way she had been trained to breathe when everything is falling apart. Slow in, slow out, slow in. Then she pulled herself up. Not fast, not dramatic, just methodical. The way you do it when you have done it before. Hands, forearms, one knee, and she was over the parapet and on her feet on the roof in one continuous movement. And she stood up straight and she breathed and she looked at Marcus Brennan's back. He was talking to Vance. He hadn't looked. He didn't know. Haas was the first one to see her. She watched the blood leave his face. His mouth opened and nothing came out. Vance followed Haas's eyes and made a sound in his throat like a door closing. Porter had both hands over his mouth. Brennan noticed the silence, the particular quality of it, the way sound drains out of a space when something has happened that nobody has the language for yet. He turned around. He looked at her standing on the roof 8 feet away from him, breathing upright, completely intact, and she watched something happen behind his eyes that she had no word for. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. Something that happens to a person when the story they have been telling themselves about the world turns out to be wrong in a way they cannot immediately process. "Hi," she said. Nobody moved. She reached up with her left hand and pushed her sleeve to the elbow. On the inside of her left forearm, running from the wrist to the crease of the elbow, was a tattoo. Not decorative, not the kind of thing you get because it looks good. It was a trident, the Naval Special Warfare insignia. Precise and deliberate and unmistakable, the mark of an operator who had passed the thing that most people in special operations say is the hardest thing a human being can physically and mentally endure. And below the trident, in small block letters, a number, an operation number, classified, the kind of number that meant nothing to most people and everything to anyone who had been in certain rooms. Brennan's eyes went to it and stayed there. "You want to tell me," she said, her voice completely level, "how many of your teammates you left behind tonight?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The performance was gone. The arrogance was gone. The polished casual cruelty was gone. He was just a 24-year-old man standing on a rooftop in the dark, looking at a woman he had just tried to kill, who was standing in front of him like nothing had happened, and he had no script for this because nothing in his life had ever prepared him for this moment. "Because where I come from," she said, stepping forward once, "you never leave a teammate, not because someone told you that in a classroom, because you learned it the way it actually gets learned." She stopped 2 feet from him. In the dark, alone, when you have nothing left and someone else's life is in your hands. Her voice was quiet and it was steady, and it was the most frightening thing anyone on that roof had ever heard. "You want to know why you've never been able to break me? Because you don't know what breaking looks like. You've been in training your whole life, and I've been in the real thing. There's a difference, Marcus. And tonight you just felt it." Vance sat on the roof with his knees up, not moving. Haas had both hands at his sides like he had forgotten what to do with them. Porter was crying silently in the way young people cry when they realize they have witnessed something they cannot take back. And Marcus Brennan stood 2 feet from Raina Thorne, and his jaw was working, but nothing was coming out. And for the first time in a life spent performing strength, he looked exactly like what he was. A boy who had confused performance with the real thing. A boy who had been applauded so long for playing a role that he had forgotten there was a role being played. A boy whose father had known the difference and had paid the ultimate price for it, and who had left behind a son who still even now didn't understand what his father had actually been. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about David Brennan, about the weight of legacy, about what it costs a son to grow up in the shadow of a man who died doing the hardest thing there is. She took one step back from him. "Get on your knees," she said. "All of you, hands visible. Now." Nobody argued. One by one they went down. Vance, Haas, Porter, and then last Marcus Brennan. He went to his knees on the roof of Malvesti Hall, and he put his hands out and he didn't look away from her. She held his gaze. She did not look away either. She reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out the radio she had been carrying all night. She pressed the button. "Colonel Whitaker," she said, "Malvesti Rooftop. Now, please." Static, then Whitaker's voice immediate and alert. En route. She clipped the radio back. She stood. She waited. The wind moved across the rooftop, and somewhere below, Georgia night was doing what Georgia night does, warm and dark and indifferent to the things that happen inside it. Nobody spoke for a long time. The silence was enormous, and everyone in it knew that whatever had existed before this moment was finished. Whatever they had believed, whatever they had assumed, whatever story they had been telling themselves about who she was and what she was made of, that story was done. There was only what actually was, which was Raina Thorne standing on a rooftop with a trident on her arm and a radio in her pocket and 4 cadets on their knees in front of her. And everything that came next. Brennan was the one who finally broke the silence. His voice was low and stripped of everything except the thing underneath everything. The thing that had been there the whole time under all the performance and the arrogance and the cruelty. "Who are you?" he said. She looked at him. "Someone who knew your father," she said. The sound that came out of Marcus Brennan then was not a word. It was not an argument. It was not an excuse or a denial or a counter. It was just a sound, small and broken and real. The first real thing she had heard from him since she arrived at Fort Benning. The first moment in which he was not performing at all. She looked at him and she kept her face still and she thought, there it is. There's the real thing. There's what I've been waiting for. She heard the roof door open. She heard boots. She heard Whitaker's voice calling her name. She didn't turn around yet. She held Marcus Brennan's eyes for one more second. One more second of the enormous, irreversible truth of this night. Then she turned to meet the Kearneys and she stood straight and she breathed and she was exactly what she had always been. In every dark place she had ever been put. She was still standing. Colonel Whitaker took in the scene in about 4 seconds. That was all it took for a man with 31 years of military experience to read a rooftop. 4 cadets on their knees. 1 Navy lieutenant standing with blood on her right sleeve and a stillness about her that was more commanding than anything he had seen from an officer half his age. He didn't say anything at first, he just looked. And then he looked at her sleeve. "You're bleeding," he said. "I'm well," Raina said. "How bad?" "Manageable." She said it the way people say things that are true but incomplete. Her right shoulder was burning with a specific kind of fire she recognized. The scar tissue had torn. Not badly, but enough that the sleeve was darkening steadily. She had felt worse. She had kept moving through worse. She kept moving now. Whitaker stepped forward and looked at the 4 cadets on their knees. His jaw was set in a way that made the muscles in his face look like they had been poured from concrete. He looked at Brennan last, and he held that look for a long time. Brennan didn't drop his eyes. That was the one thing he still had left. Whatever else the night had stripped from him, he had not broken eye contact, not with Whitaker and not with Raina. She noted it, filed it, saved it for later. "On your feet," Whitaker said. His voice was so low and so controlled, it was almost more frightening than if he had shouted. "All 4 of you." They stood. Vance was unsteady. Haas had gone somewhere inside himself, that closed-off look that people get when they know the consequences are coming and the only thing left is waiting. Porter was still red-eyed, his breathing ragged, the expression of a young man who had followed someone else's plan into a room he had no business being in and now had to live in the aftermath of that choice. Brennan stood straight. His hands were at his sides. His face had gone through several things in the last 10 minutes and had arrived somewhere that Raina could not fully name. Not defiance, not remorse, something in between, something still forming. 2 military police personnel appeared at the roof door behind Whitaker. She noted them. She had heard them on the stairs. Whitaker had come prepared, which meant he had been more worried about tonight than he had let on when she called. "Escort these 4 to the holding room in the admin building," Whitaker said to the MPs. "No communication, no phones, no talking to each other. Put them in separate rooms." "Sir," one of the MPs said. As they moved the cadets toward the door, Brennan passed within 3 feet of Raina. He slowed. The MP behind him put a hand on his arm. He didn't resist it. He just slowed and looked at her with that unformed expression and said very quietly, just for her, "You knew my father." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a man saying a sentence out loud, because if he didn't say it out loud, it would crush him from the inside. "We'll talk," she said. "Not tonight." He nodded once, a small motion, and let the MP move him forward. The roof door closed, and then it was just Raina and Whitaker and the dark and the sound of Georgia night below them. Whitaker exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that contains an entire conversation. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him all of it, concise, sequential, no editorializing. She told him about the equipment room conversation on day 8, about Chu's disclosure on day 10, about the cafeteria with Brennan, about the coordinated approach on the roof, about Haas and Vance, about the push. She said it plainly and directly, and she watched Whitaker's face move through controlled fury in real time. He was very good at controlling it. but it was there. When she finished, he stood very still for a moment. I should have seen this coming, he said. You told me Brennan worried you, she said. You were right to be worried. You just couldn't have known how far it would go. That's generous of you. It's accurate, she said. This wasn't a leadership failure on your part, Colonel. This was a character failure on theirs. Those are different things. He looked at her arm again. You need to see the medic. After we talk, she said. Raina, after we talk, she said again, and something in her voice arranged the conversation back into her hands, and they both knew it. He nodded. The UCMJ exposure here is significant, he said. Assault on a superior officer. Conduct unbecoming. Haas has a prior flag. This is going to go up the chain fast, and it's going to be loud. I know. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared for loud things before, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The four of them are looking at separation proceedings at minimum. Criminal referral is likely at least for Haas and Brennan. He paused. Porter is a witness, she said. He didn't touch me. He didn't initiate anything. He was there and he stayed when he should have walked away, but that's a different category. She paused. Recommend he cooperate fully with whatever review comes and complete the program under conditions. He's not the problem. Whitaker nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then Brennan, his father. I know. What do you want to do with that? She looked out over the edge of the roof, not at the drop, but at the lights of the base below the steady institutional glow of a place that had been training soldiers since before either of them was born. I want to talk to him, she said, before the formal process locks everything down. I want 20 minutes with him. That's irregular. Everything about this assignment has been irregular, she said. 20 minutes, Colonel, tomorrow morning, before any legal advisors get involved. Whitaker studied her. You think you can reach him? I think there's something real in him that has been buried under performance and grief and a name that's too heavy for one person to carry alone, she said. I think his father would want someone to try to him. She paused. And I think I'm the only person in this situation who has any standing to try him. A long silence. Then Whitaker said, 20 minutes, 07:30. I'll arrange it. Thank you, she said. Now, he said firmly, the medic. The medic's name was Sergeant First Class Patricia Odom, and she had been patching up soldiers at Fort Benning for 11 years, and she had seen a lot of things come through her door late at night. She cleaned and dressed Raina's shoulder with the precise economical movements of someone who does not need to make anything into a bigger deal than it is, and she did not ask questions. She did note without comment the other scars, the one along the left ribs, the one on the back of the right forearm that had its own particular story, the one at the base of her neck that disappeared under her collar. Patricia Odom said nothing about any of them because she was a professional, and because some stories don't need words, they just need to be acknowledged with steady hands and silence. You're going to want to keep that shoulder immobile for 24 hours if you can, Odom said. I'll try, Raina said. Odom looked at her with the particular look of medical professionals who know perfectly well that their instructions will be partially ignored. You've had this scar opened before, she said, and it was barely a question. Yes, Raina said. Same injury or different? Same general area, different cause. Odom nodded and said nothing more about it. She finished the dressing, taped it, and handed Raina a small packet of medication. These will help with the inflammation. The pain, too, if you'll actually take them. I'll take them, Raina said, and mostly meant it. She left the medical office at 1:15 and walked back to her quarters in the dark. The base was quiet at this hour, the particular quiet of a military installation after midnight, which is different from civilian quiet in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. There are still sounds, distant engine noise, the occasional movement of a patrol vehicle, the sound of wind through trees at the perimeter. But underneath all of it, there is a kind of held breath quality, like the place is resting but still watching. She sat at her desk. She did not turn on the overhead light, only the small desk lamp. She turned the photograph face up and looked at it for the first time since she had turned it face down on day one. 8 people, 8 faces squinting into desert sun. She looked at them one at a time. She knew their voices, their specific laughs, the particular way each of them moved under load. She knew what they ate when they had choices and what they ate when they didn't. She knew the things they talked about in the long, quiet hours between operations, the things soldiers talk about when they are far from home, and the distance makes honesty easier. She knew who they had loved and what they had been afraid of and what they had done when fear was not an option. 3 of them were alive. She was one. She thought about the fact that she was sitting here on a base in Georgia with a freshly dressed shoulder wound because a group of young soldiers had decided she was nothing. She thought about all the places she had been where people had decided she was nothing and what had happened as a result of that decision. She thought about how the decision was always every single time the most expensive mistake those people ever made. She thought about Marcus Brennan and the sound he had made when she said she knew his father. That small, broken sound, that one real moment in a sea of performance. She had been carrying the weight of that sound since the roof, and she would continue to carry it because that was who she was. She did not put down the things that mattered. That was another way she was different from the people who underestimated her. They put things down when they got heavy. She did not put things down. She went to sleep at 200 with the photograph still face up on the desk. She slept 4 hours. When she woke at 600, she lay still for exactly 30 seconds, in the way she had trained herself to do, letting her senses assemble the environment before she moved. Old habit, necessary habit. The habit that had saved her life at least twice in contexts she was not permitted to discuss. Then she got up. She dressed carefully around the bandaged shoulder. She drank her coffee, standing at the window. She thought about what she was going to say to Marcus Brennan in the 20 minutes Whitaker had given her. She thought about David Brennan, about what she actually knew of him and how she knew it. She had not been lying when she told Marcus she knew his father. But the truth of it was more specific than that general statement implied. She had been in theater in September 2014. She had been part of a joint interagency element operating out of Jalalabad when the situation in Kunar went sideways. She had not been on the ground with Brennan's team, but she had been on the radio. She had heard the transmissions. She had heard the voices of men in a situation that was deteriorating in real time, and she had heard David Brennan's voice among them calm and clear, and directing his people toward a position that would cost him his life and save 3 others. She had written a report about that operation, a classified report that very few people had ever read. In that report, she had written 8 words about Lieutenant Colonel David Brennan that she had spent 4 years believing she might never have the occasion to share with anyone who actually needed to hear them. At 7:25, she walked to the admin building. The MP at the door waved her through. Whitaker was waiting in the hallway outside the interview room. He looked like he had slept even less than she had, which was saying something. "He's been asking about you since 0600, Whitaker said. "Not about the charges, not about what happens next. Just asking if you're okay." She absorbed that. "Has he spoken to a legal advisor yet?" "One was offered. He declined for now." "Okay," she said. 20 minutes, Whitaker said. "I'll be right outside." She went in. Brennan was sitting at the table in the center of the room. He was in the same clothes from the night before. He had not slept. That was visible in the quality of his skin and the particular kind of stillness that is not calm, but exhaustion. He looked up when she entered, and she watched something move through his face. Relief and shame arriving at the same time, which is one of the more complicated human expressions to witness. She sat down across from him. She did not have her clipboard. She did not have anything. Just herself in a chair looking at David Brennan's son. "You're okay," he said. "I'm okay," she said. He exhaled. It was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated. The exhale of someone who has spent the night with the weight of a thing they cannot undo, and who has just received information that makes that weight marginally more bearable without reducing it at all. "I didn't know," he started. "I know you didn't know," she said. "That's the point." He looked at his hands on the table. "What happens now with the charges?" "That's not what I'm here to talk about," she said. "You'll have legal counsel. That process will happen. I'm not here about that." He looked up. "Then why are you here?" "Because I have 8 words that I wrote about your father 4 years ago, and I think you need to hear them." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, actual physical weight that you feel in your chest. Marcus Brennan sat across from her, and his jaw worked, and his eyes went somewhere else for a moment, and then came back. "Tell me," he said, barely above a whisper. He held that radio until every one of his people had a clear route out. She said, "I was listening on the other end. I heard his voice for 41 minutes while that situation deteriorated around him. He never raised it. He never broke. He directed each of his men by name, and he stayed on that frequency until the last one confirmed exfil." She paused. "The 8 words I wrote in my report were these: he was afraid and he did it anyway." Brennan made a sound. He turned his head to the side. His hand came up and covered his mouth, and he breathed hard through his nose. He was not going to cry in front of her. She respected that, even as she recognized it as one more performance. But this one was different from all the others. This one came from something genuine. The refusal to break in front of a woman his father would have respected. That was not arrogance. That was a kind of honor, however imperfect. "He was afraid," Brennan said roughly. "You're sure?" "I heard it in his voice," she said. "Not the kind of afraid that stops you. The other kind. The kind that means you understand exactly what the situation is, and you choose to stay in it anyway because your people need you to stay." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand the difference?" He nodded. He still had his hand over his mouth. "That's what courage it actually is," she said. "Not the absence of fear, not performance, not making everyone in the room feel your power. It's being afraid and doing it anyway because something else matters more." She sat back. "Your father knew that. He knew it all the way to the end." Brennan dropped his hand. His eyes were red, not crying, but close in the territory adjacent to it where real men live when they are carrying things too heavy for performance. "I've been trying to be him," he said, Since the day he died, every single day. I know, she said. I thought being like him meant being the strongest person in the room, the hardest, the one nobody questioned. I know, she said again. That's not what he was, is it? It was not a question. He already knew the answer. She could see him arriving at it in real time, the collision between the image he had built of his father and the man she had just described, and she watched him understand that those two things were not the same, that the image was a monument he had built to manage his grief, and that the man, the real man, had been something quieter and harder and more human than any monument. No, she said, that's not what he was. Brennan put both hands flat on the table. He breathed. I pushed you off a building, he said. You did. And you pulled yourself back up. I did. He looked at her. Why didn't you report all of it earlier the first week? You had enough. Why did you wait? She considered how much to give him. She decided on all of it because he had earned all of it with the last 20 minutes of being, for the first time since she had arrived, completely and entirely himself. Because I wanted to see what you were made of, she said, not the performance, the real thing underneath. I needed to see if there was something worth saving before I decided what kind of report to write about this program and the people in it. He stared at her. And what did you find? Tonight on that roof, for about 30 seconds, I found your father, she said. When you didn't look away, when you didn't make excuses, when you went to your knees without an argument. She held his gaze. That was David Brennan. That was the real thing. The silence stretched between them, and it was different from every other silence in this story. It was not hostile. It was not tactical. It was just two people in a room, one of whom had carried a dead man's name like an anchor, and one of whom had heard that dead man's voice on a radio on the worst night of his life. And between them, the truth of who David Brennan actually was, finally honestly free of the monument. What happens to me now? Brennan asked. Not afraid, just asking. The process happens, she said. It's going to be hard. You may lose this. She meant the program. He understood what she meant. But losing this doesn't have to be the end, depending on what you do next. She stood. The hardest thing you can do in the next 6 months is tell the truth. About everything. Every choice you made, every moment you could have stopped it and didn't. Tell it plainly. Don't perform remorse. Don't manage your image. Just tell the truth and let whatever comes from that come. He nodded, slowly. The nod of someone who understands that what they're agreeing to is going to cost them enormously and who is agreeing anyway. One more thing, she said at the door. Cadet Chu. He came to me 4 days ago. He told me what he knew. He didn't have to do that. Whatever happens in the review process, make sure his role in this is part of the record. Brennan looked at that information for a moment. Chu told you. He did. Something moved through Brennan's face, not betrayal. She was watching carefully, and it was not betrayal. It was recognition. The slow, humbling recognition of what real integrity looks like when you see it, and the understanding that you did not do it when you had the chance. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. She put her hand on the door. Whitaker was waiting outside. The process was waiting outside. The report, the review board, the UC, MJ, proceedings, the long institutional machinery of consequence was all waiting outside. Lieutenant, Brennan said. She looked back. My father, was he scared at the end? At the very end? She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she had heard on that radio in Jalalabad, about the last transmission she had logged before the silence came, about the quality of David Brennan's voice in that final minute. She thought about what was true and what a son needed to hear, and discovered to her own quiet relief that they were exactly the same thing. No, she said. At the end, he was not scared. At the end, he knew his people were out, and he knew the job was done, and his voice was completely steady. She paused. He said his team's call signs, one by one, like he was checking on them. She held the eye contact. He was thinking about his people, right up until the last second. That's who your father was. She went out the door. Whitaker was there as promised. He looked at her face and read something in it and nodded once without saying anything, because he was a man who understood that some moments don't need a response, only recognition. Down the hallway through the admin building's front door and into the early morning light of Fort Benning. The base was coming alive around her. Formations moving, engine noise. Someone calling cadence somewhere to the east in the slow rhythm that soldiers have called since before either of them was born. She stood on the steps and let the Georgia morning air hit her face and breathed it in. Her shoulder ached. Her hands were tired. There was a weight in her chest that had a name, and that name was the entirety of the last 11 days compressed into a single heavy point just behind her sternum. She had a report to write, a real one. Not just the evaluation of the training program, though that was coming too, but the other one. The one about a cohort of young soldiers and what they were and what they could become and what the difference was between the two. She had things to say in that report that she had been waiting 11 days to say and that she now had the full evidence to support. She also had a phone call to make. To Commander DeLuca, who would want to know she was standing up and walking and in one piece, which she was technically all three. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled to his number. She was about to press call when she stopped. She stood there in the morning light with the phone in her hand, and she looked out at the base at the cadets moving through their morning routines, at the particular ordinary purposefulness of a military installation going about its day. She thought about David Brennan checking on his people one by one in the last minute of his life. She thought about her photograph on the desk in her quarters. 8 faces, 3 still living. She pressed call. Raina, DeLuca's voice immediate. He had been waiting. He had probably been awake. I'm standing up, she said, a breath on his end, long and slow, the breath of someone releasing something they have been holding. Good, he said. That's good. I have a report to write, she said, and then I think I'm going to sleep for about 12 hours. You earned it. Ray, she said. Yeah. Those 8 words, the ones about being afraid and doing it anyway. Yeah. I should have been saying that to people for years, she said, not just writing it in classified reports that nobody reads. A pause. What does that mean? I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to figure it out. She ended the call. She stood there another moment. Then she turned and went back inside because there was work to do and she was the person who had to do it. She was still the person who had to do it. That had not changed. That would not change. She was Raina Thorne, and she did not put things down when they got heavy. She carried them. She had always carried them. She would keep on carrying them until the day she couldn't anymore. And today was not that day. The report took her 3 days to write, not because she didn't know what to say. She had known what to say since day 2 at Fort Benning, when she watched Marcus Brennan perform competence in a classroom and filed the word underneath it, hollow. She knew what she wanted to say. The question was how to say it in a way that would actually change something. Because Raina had written enough reports in her career to know that most of them disappeared into institutional filing systems and were never heard from again. She had written reports that should have mattered and watched them get buried by people who preferred comfortable fictions to uncomfortable facts. She was not going to let that happen with this one. She started with the cadets, all 43 of them, not just the 4, because the problem at Fort Benning was not 4 bad actors in an otherwise healthy program. The problem was a culture that had made 4 bad actors feel safe enough to operate openly for 11 days before anyone with authority intervened. The culture was the story. The culture was what needed to change. She wrote about the organizational chart printout on the fence. She wrote about the hallway comments in the car fob in the notes under her door. She wrote about the way the cadre had seen and not seen the particular institutional blindness that develops when a program has run long enough that certain behaviors become invisible through familiarity. She wrote about Haas and his prior disciplinary flag and the failure to monitor him closely enough after that flag was raised. She wrote about Brennan. She was careful with this section. She wrote about what she had observed and not about what she had felt, which is the discipline that separates a good report from a personal document. She wrote about performance versus substance, about the particular danger of talented people who have never been made to understand the difference, about what happens when a program rewards the appearance of excellence over the reality of it for long enough that the two become indistinguishable to the people inside it. And then she wrote the section she had been composing in her head since the morning after the roof. The section about what the program needed to become, not just for women, not just for diversity metrics or joint service evaluations or any of the political language that got attached to these things and immediately made the people who most needed to hear them stop listening, but for the program itself, for the soldiers it was trying to produce. Because a program that trained people to perform strength without understanding it was not training warriors. It was training actors, and actors get people killed. She wrote that last sentence, and then she looked at it for a long time. Then she left it in. On the second day of writing, Whitaker knocked on her door at 1400 hours. She called him in. He sat across the desk in the single chair her quarters provided, and he looked at the pages she had spread across the desk with the expression of a man who understood that something significant was being built, and who was not entirely sure whether it was going to help him or land on him. The JAG office has completed their initial review, he said. Brennan, Haas, and Vance are all facing formal charges under Article 128, aggravated assault on a superior officer. Haas has a second charge for his conduct during the field exercise. Conduct unbecoming. He paused. They're recommending a general court-martial for Haas. That's appropriate, she said. For Brennan and Vance, they're looking at special court-martial, potential for dismissal from the program, reduction in rank confinement. He paused again, more deliberately this time. There are people above me, Raina, who are going to want this handled quietly. You know that. She looked at him. How far above you? Far enough that the call came this morning. She set her pen down. What exactly did the call say? Whitaker's jaw tightened. That given the interagency sensitivity of your assignment and the public relations complexity of a court-martial proceeding involving a Navy female officer and Army Ranger candidates, it might be in everyone's interest to pursue non-judicial punishment under Article 15 and process the separation quietly. The silence that followed was the kind she was very good at producing. The kind that made the person across from her feel the full weight of what they had just said. "No," she said. "Raina, no." "Ugh," she said again. And there was nothing loud about it and nothing aggressive, and it was the most absolute word she had spoken since she arrived at Fort Benning. These men assaulted a commissioned officer of the United States military on a military installation in front of witnesses. I hung off the side of a 4-story building by my hands because a Ranger candidate decided I was disposable. That does not get processed quietly under Article 15. That gets the full weight of the Uniform Code of Military Justice exactly the way it was designed to be used. Whitaker looked at her for a longer moment, then he said, "I agree with you." She blinked, just once. "I'm not here to talk you out of it," he said. "I'm here to tell you it's coming so you can be prepared for the pressure. Because it's going to come from directions you don't expect, and it's going to be phrased in language that sounds reasonable, and it's going to be persistent." He leaned forward slightly. "And I want you to know that when it comes, I'm going to be standing next to you saying what you just said, because you're right. And because this base and this program cannot be the kind of place where that happens to someone and we make it disappear." She looked at him. She felt something shift in her chest that was not quite relief, but was something adjacent to gratitude. The specific gratitude you feel when a person in authority does the right thing in a situation where they could have chosen the easier path and no one would have blamed them for it. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just finish your report, because your report is going to be the thing that makes it impossible to bury." He left. She picked up her pen. She wrote faster. On the morning of the 3rd day, something happened that she had not anticipated. 39 cadets requested a formal meeting with her. Not through command channels, not through Whitaker. They went directly to the staff duty officer and asked as a group to meet with Lieutenant Thorne before she completed her evaluation. The staff duty officer, who had no idea how to process this, called Whitaker, who called Raina, who said yes. They met in the main classroom building at 800. 39 cadets arranged in rows standing when she came in, which was itself something. She told them to sit. They sat. She stood at the front of the room and looked at them. These were the people who had not been on that roof. These were the people who had watched 11 days of low-grade harassment and said nothing and done nothing and continued their training cycle. She had thought a great deal about them in the last 3 days, about their culpability, about the difference between participation and silence, and whether silence in a situation like this one was its own kind of answer. A cadet in the 2nd row raised his hand. 2nd year. She had noted him before. Cadet James Wilder. Strong performance metrics, quiet, not part of any visible social cluster. "Ma'am," he said. "Go ahead, Cadet Wilder," she said. His eyebrows moved slightly when she used his name. He hadn't known she knew it. "We wanted to say that what happened was wrong," he said, "and that most of us knew something was happening, and we didn't stop it." He said it plainly, without deflection, in the voice of someone who had been awake for several nights deciding how to say this. "We don't have a good excuse for that." "I don't think there is one." The room was very quiet. "We wanted you to know that before you finished your report," Wilder said, "because we thought it mattered that you knew we knew." She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you stop it?" Nobody answered right away. Then a cadet in the back row, one she recognized as Cadet Amara Singh, said, "Because Brennan was Brennan. Because you don't go up against someone like that in a cohort without it costing you something. And we were all afraid of what it would cost." "That's honest," Raina said. "Thank you for that." "Does it change anything?" Wilder asked. "For the report." She looked at him. "It changes something," she said. "Not the facts. The facts are fixed. But what you're doing right now, sitting in this room and saying these things out loud, that's in the report too. The whole picture goes in, not just the worst of it." Another cadet raised his hand. She didn't know this one. 1st-year Young looked like he had slept even less than she had. "Ma'am, is it true you're a Navy SEAL?" The question landed in the room with a particular kind of weight. A few cadets shifted. Several more leaned slightly forward. She looked at the young man who had asked it and at the 38 other faces that were all carrying the same question without having said it. She had been waiting for this question for 3 days. She had decided 2 days ago exactly how she was going to answer it. "I'm a Naval Special Warfare operator," she said. "The specifics of my operational background are classified. What I can tell you is that I've been in combat, real combat, not training scenarios and not simulations. I've been in places where the consequence of getting it wrong wasn't a failing grade. It was a body bag." She paused to let that settle. "I want you to think about that the next time you're inclined to assume you know what someone is made of before you've seen what they do when it actually counts." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room had that quality it sometimes gets when 39 people are all thinking the same thing at the same time and none of them quite know how to be the first to say it. Wilder spoke again, his voice lower this time. "We underestimated you. Your entire culture underestimated me," she said. "That's the larger problem, and that's what the report addresses." She looked around the room. You're going to be officers. Some of you are going to lead people into situations where everything you think you know gets stripped away in about 30 seconds, and all you have left is who you actually are, not who you've been performing, who you actually are. She paused. The work you need to do is figuring out the difference before that moment comes, because in that moment, there's no time to figure it out. She dismissed them at 0840. They filed out slowly the way people leave rooms when they're not quite done processing what happened in them. Wilder stopped at the door. He turned around and looked at her across the empty rows. I hope you come back, he said, to this program, not to evaluate it, just to, he stopped trying to find the word, to teach. She looked at him. Finish the program first, cadet, she said. Then we'll talk about teaching. Something happened in his face that was the beginning of something she had no name for yet, but that she recognized as important. Then he nodded and left, and she was alone in the classroom in the particular silence that rooms hold after something significant has just occurred in them. She sat down in the nearest chair. She had not intended to sit down. Her shoulder ached and her legs were tired in the bone-deep way that accumulates over days of moving through difficult things, and she sat in the chair and she breathed and she let herself be still for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which she was not Lieutenant Thorne, and not the evaluator, and not the operator with the classified file and the trident on her arm. Just a woman in a chair in a quiet room who was very tired and who had not quite let herself acknowledge that until this exact moment. Then she stood up. She went back to her quarters. She picked up her pen. She finished the report. She submitted it to Colonel Whitaker's secure inbox at 1347 on the 14th day of her 3-week assignment. It was 41 pages. Whitaker called her 11 minutes later. You read fast, she said. I skimmed, he said. I'll read it properly tonight. But Raina, he paused. This is going to change things. That's the point, she said. I mean higher than here. This is going to go places. The recommendations you've made, the policy language in Section 4, the cultural audit framework, this isn't a Fort Benning document. This is a Joint Chiefs document. She had known that when she wrote it. She had written it knowing exactly where she wanted it to go and who she needed to read it. Is that a problem? She said. No, Whitaker said, and she could hear in his voice something that sounded like pride, which surprised her slightly. It's not a problem at all. I'm going to forward it with my full endorsement, and I'm going to make sure it lands on the right desks. A pause. What you wrote about Brennan in Section 7, about his father. She waited. Is that true, all of it? Every word she said. Another pause. Longer. His father was a good man, Whitaker said. I knew David Brennan. Not well, but I knew him, and what you wrote. He stopped. Started again. That's going to be part of Marcus Brennan's record. When all this process is through, the charges, the separation, all of it. What you wrote about his father is going to be in there too. That's why I wrote it, she said. She spent that afternoon doing the thing she had been putting off since the night of the roof. She went to the holding area where Haas was being held separately from the others, and she stood outside the door for a moment. She did not go in. She was not going to go in. She had said what she needed to say to Brennan. Haas was a different situation. Haas's problem went deeper than grief and performance and the crushing weight of a legendary father's name. Haas had something in him that was not going to be reached in a 20-minute conversation in an interview room, and she was honest enough with herself to know that reaching him was not her job. Her job was to have documented what he did accurately and completely, which she had. The system would do what the system did. She hoped it would be enough. She was not entirely sure it would be. She walked away from the door. She went to find Shu. He was in the PT facility, working out alone in the late afternoon. He saw her come in and stop what he was doing and stood. He still carried that wariness around her, that particular tension of someone who has done the right thing and is not yet sure what it cost him. Lieutenant, he said. At ease, cadet, she said. I'm not here officially. I just wanted to tell you something. He waited. Your name is in the report, she said. What you did, coming to me 4 days before the NAV exercise. It's in there, on record, permanently. She paused. That matters. What you did matters. And the fact that it cost you something that you knew it was going to cost you, and you did it anyway, that matters most of all. He looked at her with those careful, honest eyes. Did it help, he said. What I told you. Did it actually change anything? She thought about the roof, about the 3 seconds she had hung in the air, about the fact that she had known it was coming and had positioned herself accordingly as close to that lower parapet as she could manage without making it obvious, about the fact that being prepared had given her the margin she needed to hold on. She thought about whether to tell him all of that. She decided he had earned it. Yes, she said, it helped. He nodded slowly, something released in his posture. Barely visible, but real. The specific physical expression of a weight being lifted that you've been carrying long enough that you stopped noticing how heavy it was. Good, Haya, he said. I'm glad. Your father would be proud, she said. Chu looked at her, his jaw tightened. He looked away and then back. How do you know about my father? I read all your files, she said. Remember? He almost smiled, almost. Right, he said. She left him there and walked out into the late afternoon. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Commander DeLuca, she answered. The report hit the NSWC inbox 3 minutes ago, DeLuca said. She blinked. Whitaker moved fast. He didn't just forward it through base channels. He sent it simultaneously to ForceCom, the Joint Chiefs Office, and the Office of the Secretary of the Army. DeLuca's voice had a particular quality she recognized as controlled astonishment. Raina, there are people in Washington who are going to wake up tomorrow morning and read what you wrote. Good, she said. There are also going to be people in Washington who are very unhappy about it. Also good, she said. Unhappy people pay attention. A pause. You know this means the quiet resolution option is completely dead. It was always completely dead, she said. I just needed to make sure everyone else understood that. DeLuca laughed, a short, genuine sound. God, you're stubborn. Yes, she said simply because it was true, and there was no point in being anything other than accurate about it. There's something else, DeLuca said, and his voice changed slightly, shifted into a register she recognized, the register of information that is going to land with weight. The J-Age preliminary review. They went back through Haas's prior flag, the incident with the female instructor 6 months ago. They found additional complaints from 2 other women, not filed formally. The women didn't feel safe filing them formally. She stopped walking. How serious? Serious, DeLuca said. The kind of serious that means his current charges are the smallest part of what's about to come down on him. She stood very still. She thought about Haas, the particular coiled quality of him, the way he had moved on that roof, the way avoidance had looked like composure from a distance. Are the women being supported? She said. The command is moving on it now, DeLuca said. Your report accelerated everything. When Whitaker's endorsement hit those inboxes, it created a situation where not moving wasn't an option anymore. She breathed, in and out, the way she had breathed on the rooftop ledge, the way she breathed through every moment that was larger than she had the capacity to feel all at once. Those women, she said, their names go in the record, their accounts go in the record. They don't stay invisible. That's being handled, DeLuca said. I'm on it personally. Thank you, Ray, she said. And she meant it in a way that encompassed far more than the current conversation. She meant it for 15 years of him being the person on the other end of the phone in every difficult moment. She meant it for the conversations he had kept and the ones he had not pressed her to have. She meant it for the knowledge that there were people in the world who had read her real file and still unconditionally had her back. Go sleep, he said. That's an order. You don't outrank me, she said. I absolutely outrank you. Barely, she said. He laughed again and ended the call. She went back to her quarters. She sat at the desk. She looked at the photograph. 8 faces, 3 living. She thought about the things that were in motion now because of what she had written and what she had done and what she had endured without breaking on this base for 14 days. She thought about the women whose complaints had never been formally filed and who were going to be heard now. She thought about the cadets in that classroom who had said the true and difficult thing about their own silence and who would carry that moment with them into every unit they would ever lead. She thought about Chu and his Marine Corps father. She thought about Porter, who had cried silently on a rooftop and who had the most important choice of his young life still ahead of him. She thought about Marcus Brennan. She had not seen him since the interview room. He had been moved to a separate facility for the duration of the legal process. She wondered what he was doing right now. She wondered if he was sleeping or staring at the ceiling the way she had stared at it on her first night at Fort Benning, lying in the same room listening to the same distant sounds of the base. She wondered if David Brennan's voice was playing in his head, the voice of a man who had been afraid and done it anyway. She hoped it was. She hoped it was loud. Her phone buzzed one more time, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Silence on the line for a moment, then a voice. Female, careful. Is this Lieutenant Thorne? Yes, she said. My name is Elena Marsh, the voice said. I'm one of the women, from the Haas complaints. A pause, she breathed through it. I heard you were still on the base. I hope this number is right. It's right, Raina said. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady. I'm here. Talk to me. Another pause. Longer. Then Elena Marsh began to talk, and Raina Thorne sat in her chair in the small room with the institutional light and the photograph on the desk, and she listened. She listened the way she did everything, completely, without looking away, without putting anything down. She listened until there was nothing left to hear. And then she said, Thank you for calling. What happened to you is in the record now. It is not going to disappear. I will make sure of that personally. She paused. Are you safe right now? Yes, Elena said. I'm safe. Good, Raina said. You were brave to call, braver than you know. The call ended. Raina sat in the quiet for a long time. The night had come fully down around the base, the particular sounds of after midnight settling in. Somewhere outside, a patrol vehicle moved along the perimeter road. She was not finished here. She had thought she might be after the report, but she understood now that the report was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something larger than this assignment, larger than 3 weeks at Fort Benning, larger than one cohort of Rangers and one night on a rooftop. It was the beginning of a conversation that the institution had been refusing to have with itself for a very long time. And that conversation was now going to happen whether the institution was ready or not. She looked at the photograph one last time. She thought about her 5 remaining days on this base and what she needed to do with them. She thought about the next morning and the morning after that and the work that was waiting in each of them. She thought about being afraid and doing it anyway, which was, when she was honest, the most accurate description of her life she had ever heard. Then she turned off the lamp. She lay down. She closed her eyes. Outside, Georgia night continued its slow movement toward morning, indifferent and patient and dark, and inside, Raina Thorne breathed the steady, deliberate breath of someone who has learned to rest in the spaces between hard things, because the next hard thing is always coming, and rest is not weakness. Rest is preparation. Rest is the thing that lets you keep standing up. And she was not done standing up, not by a long way. She was up before the base at 05:30. The 5 remaining days had a different weight to them than the first 14. The report was done. The charges were filed. The machinery was moving. She could have stepped back from all of it and let the institution process what she had set in motion. That would have been the professional choice, the clean choice, the kind of choice that keeps your hands uncomplicated and your paperwork tidy. She was not built for the clean choice. She spent the first of those 5 days doing something nobody had asked her to do and that nobody could have anticipated. She requested access to the full training records of every cadet in the current cycle, not just the 4, all 43. She sat in the small conference room off Whitaker's wing, and she went through every performance evaluation, every instructor, note every disciplinary flag and commendation, one by one for 11 hours. She ate a sandwich someone left outside the door at 1300. She drank 3 cups of coffee. She did not stop. What she was building was an addendum to the main report, a supplementary document that went cadet by cadet through what the program had produced, what it had failed to produce, and what the difference looked like in the data if you knew how to read it. Because the main report addressed culture and policy and institutional failure. The addendum was about people, specific people, and she believed, with the particular conviction of someone who has staked their life on reading humans correctly under pressure, that the specific people mattered as much as the system that shaped them. Whitaker found her at 17:30 still at the table. He stood in the doorway and looked at the spread of files and said nothing for a moment. "You were supposed to be winding down," he said. "I am winding down," she said. "This is what that looks like." He came in and sat across from her. "There's been movement from Washington," he said. "The report has been read at several levels. The reaction is," he paused, choosing his word, "significant." "Positive significant or damage control significant?" she said without looking up. "Both," he said, "simultaneously, which means you hit something real." She set down her pen. "Who's unhappy?" "People who have built careers on the current structure," he said. "People who see the cultural audit framework in Section 4 as a direct criticism of their programs. People who think opening this conversation publicly creates vulnerability for the institution." He paused. "And people who are privately relieved someone finally said it out loud and are not going to admit that officially for at least 6 months." She nodded. She had expected all of that. And the court-martial proceedings, moving forward, all 3, Haas, Brennan, Vance, no quiet resolution. My endorsement held. The secretary's office is not pushing back. He looked at her. "You made it impossible to push back. That was deliberate." "Everything I do is deliberate," she said. He almost smiled. "The Haas situation has expanded significantly. The JAG office found 2 more complaints beyond the ones DeLuca told you about. 5 women total, all within this installation, and all within the last 2 years. His voice tightened. 5 Raina, and not one formal complaint made it past the first level of command. She sat very still. "That changes the scope," she said. "It changes everything," he said. "We're looking at a systemic failure of the reporting structure itself, not just individual conduct. The investigation has been handed to the IG's office. It is no longer just about the night on the roof." She thought about Elena Marsh's voice on the phone. Careful and quiet and brave in the way that people are brave when they have been afraid for a long time and have finally decided that the fear is less expensive than the silence. "The women need advocates," she said. "Real ones, not institutional liaisons who are also responsible for managing the institution's exposure, independent advocates." "I know," Whitaker said. "That's already in motion. Your report mentioned it in Section 6. The legal office has been on it since this morning." "Good," she said. She picked up her pen again. "Then let me finish this." He stood. He looked at the files spread across the table. He looked at her, bent over them in the late afternoon light. He said with a quietness that was not soft but was genuine. David Brennan would have liked you. She looked up, held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, I know. He left. She went back to the files. The addendum was finished by 2,200. She submitted it to Whitaker's inbox, and then she lay down on her cot without changing out of her clothes, and she slept like a person who has done the thing they were sent to do and has nothing left to prove to the dark. The second day brought something she had not planned for. At 900, a staff officer knocked on her door and told her that Cadet Marcus Brennan had submitted a written request through his legal counsel. Not about the charges, not about the proceedings, a personal request forwarded through proper channels asking for a second meeting with Lieutenant Thorne. 20 minutes, at her discretion. She read the request twice. Then she said yes. They met in the same room as before. Same table, same chairs. But Brennan was different. 3 days of legal proceedings and institutional process had done something to him that the roof and the interview room had started. He was smaller somehow, not physically, but the performance was entirely gone now. There was nothing left of it. What sat across from her was not the cadet who had walked through Fort Benning like he owned it. It was a 24-year-old man who had broken something he could not put back together and who was trying to figure out what to do with that. Thank you for seeing me, he said. You had 20 minutes and you asked, she said. That's enough. He nodded, his hands were on the table. He looked at them for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said, about my father being afraid and doing it anyway. He paused. I've been thinking about it every hour since you said it. And she said, and I think I've been performing his courage instead of building my own, he said. He said it like it had cost him something significant to arrive at those exact words which she suspected it had. I thought being his son meant being the hardest person in every room, the one nobody questioned. I thought that was the inheritance. He stopped. But what you described wasn't that. What you described was a man who was scared out of his mind and stayed anyway because his people needed him to stay. That's not the same thing. No, she said, it's not. I've never been actually scared of anything, he said. I've performed being fearless. That's different. Being fearless means you don't know what the real stakes are. He looked up. My father knew. That's why he was afraid. He knew exactly what could happen, and he stayed anyway. She looked at him. She was very still. She was thinking about whether she was watching something real or whether she was watching a more sophisticated performance than the one she had seen before. She was good enough at reading people to know the difference, and what she was seeing was real. She was sure of it. Yes, she said, that's exactly right. I don't know who I am without the performance, he said. It came out rough and honest and more vulnerable than anything else he had said in the 26 days she had known of him. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I don't know what's underneath it. That's the work, she said. That's the actual work. Not the PT, not the land nav, not the tactical scenarios. That, what you just said, that question is the work. He nodded slowly. Will I get to finish the program after everything? She was quiet for a moment. She was not going to lie to him. She was not going to give him comfort that was not grounded in reality. I don't know, she said. That's not my decision, and it's not something I can predict. The proceedings will determine what's possible and what isn't. What I can tell you is that what happens after this, whether you finish the program or not, is still entirely about what you do next, not what you did. He absorbed that. My father didn't quit, he said, even when it was going to kill him. No, she said, he didn't. Then I won't either, Brennan said, not dramatically, not performing. Just quietly, plainly, like a decision being made in the deepest and most private part of a person. Whatever the process decides, I won't quit. She stood. She extended her hand across the table. He looked at it for a moment, and then he stood, and he shook it. His grip was firm, not aggressive, just real. Make something true out of this, she said. That's all. Just make something true. He held her hand for one extra second, just one. Thank you, he said, for not letting me stay what I was. She let go. She went to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame, which was becoming a habit in these rooms, these doorway moments, where the last thing gets said. Your father checked on his people right to the end, she said. By name. Every one of them. She looked back at him. That's your inheritance, not the performance. That. She walked out. She did not look back this time. The third day was the hearing for Haas. She was called as the primary witness. She had known she would be, and she had prepared for it with the same discipline she brought to everything. She testified for 2.5 hours. She answered every question accurately and completely. She did not editorialize. She did not show anger. She presented the facts with the precision of someone who has understood since the earliest days of her career that facts properly presented are more devastating than any emotional display. The facts were devastating. Haas's attorney attempted twice to reframe the night on the roof as a mutual confrontation. Both times the facts dismantled it cleanly. The third time, the attorney tried a different angle, suggesting that Raina's presence on the roof outside the marked observation corridor was itself irregular and provocative. She waited until the question was complete, and then she said very quietly, "I was there to observe a training exercise. The cadets were there to assault me. Those are different things." The hearing officer called a brief recess 15 minutes after that exchange. When it resumed, Haas was different. He had been contained and cold through most of the morning. During the recess, something had changed in him. She saw it when he came back in. The cold head had cracked. Underneath it was not remorse. It was something more complicated and more ugly. It was the specific fury of someone who has always believed the rules did not quite apply to them, and who is now discovering with violent clarity that they do. He looked at her once during the afternoon session. Just once. Long and direct and full of something she had seen in other rooms in other countries from other men. She held his gaze and she did not look away, and she was not afraid of him, because she had never been afraid of him, and because fear of Haas had never been the relevant emotion. The relevant emotion was something colder and more useful. The recognition that he was exactly as dangerous as she had assessed him to be on day one, and that the most important thing she could do was make sure that danger was properly contained before she left this base. By the end of the second day of testimony, the hearing officer's face said everything about how the proceedings were going. Haas would face a general court-martial. It was not a question anymore. It was a conclusion that had been building since the first file crossed the JAG office's desk, and it was now inevitable in the way that things become inevitable when the truth is documented completely enough that there is no corner left for an alternative story to hide in. She walked out of the hearing room into the corridor and found Cadet Wilder waiting. She stopped. He was in his uniform off duty, which meant he had come here on his own time. "Cadet," she said. "Ma'am." He hesitated. "I testified this morning before you, to the IG's office, about the culture stuff, the pattern of behavior I observed over the last year." She had not known that. Whitaker had not mentioned it. "How did it go?" she said. "Hard," he said honestly. "But okay," he paused. "I wanted to make sure you knew, that it wasn't just you, that people from inside the program were saying it too." She looked at him. She thought about what it cost a cadet to testify against the culture of his own cohort, about what that cost him socially, professionally, within the daily life of a training program where you are surrounded by the same 42 people every hour of every day. It was not nothing. It was in its way its own kind of courage. The quieter kind. The kind that doesn't get a trident or a silver star. "You did the right thing, Cadet Wilder," she said. "You'll know that for the rest of your career every time it matters." He nodded. He looked like he might say something else, and then decided against it. He started to turn away, and then she said, "The invitation stands. When you finish the program, if you want to talk about teaching." She paused. "There are things this program needs that it isn't getting. You might be part of providing them eventually, if you stay who you are right now." He straightened slightly. Not in a performative way, in the way that people straighten when they've been given something real to carry. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She went back to work. The fourth day was her last full day at Fort Benning. She had a morning call with the Joint Chiefs Office, a representative named Colonel Sandra Park, who had read the report twice and the addendum once, and who spoke with the particular precision of someone whose job is to translate difficult truths into institutional action. They talked for 90 minutes. At the end of it, Park said something Raina had not expected. "The secretary wants to meet with you," Park said. "In person, when you're back in California." Raina was quiet for a moment. "About the report." "About the report and about what comes next," Park said. "The cultural audit framework you propose, there's appetite at the highest level to implement it. Not just at Benning, across joint training commands." A pause. "Your report is going to become policy lieutenant. We want you in the room when that happens." She sat with that for a moment. She thought about what DeLuca had said about her voice having a specific kind of flat when she wasn't fine. She thought about the photograph on her desk. 8 people and 3 still living. She thought about Elena Marsh's voice on the phone. Careful and brave. She thought about what she had said to DeLuca on the morning after the roof about 8 words in a classified report that nobody reads, and how she should have been saying them out loud for years. "I'll be in the room," she said. She spent that afternoon doing the last thing on her list. She went to the PT field alone at 1600 an hour before evening formation, and she stood in the middle of it and she looked at it. The same field where she had stood on day 1 while 43 cadets ran their morning intervals, and Marcus Brennan had looked at her with that performance contempt, and she had written the word on her clipboard, and the word was patience. She thought about patience, about what it actually means. Not waiting, not endurance, but the specific willingness to stay in a situation long enough for the true shape of it to emerge. She had been patient on this field and in these buildings and on that rooftop and in those interview rooms, and the true shape of everything had emerged because of it. She stood on the field for 8 minutes. Then she walked back to her quarters and she packed. She packed the same way she had unpacked, deliberately and without ceremony. The small things first. the practical items, the gear, and then last, the photograph, which she picked up from the desk and held for a moment before sliding it into the inner pocket of her duffel, where she always carried it. Not face down this time. Face up where she could feel the edge of it against her chest when she moved. 8 faces, 3 still living. She carried them all. Whitaker met her at the vehicle lot at 06:15 on the 5th morning. He was in full uniform. She was in her civilian clothes duffel over her good shoulder, the other one still moving carefully under the bandage that Odom had redressed the previous afternoon without comment. The base was waking up around them. The sounds of morning formation beginning to drift across the parade ground. Safe travels, Whitaker said. Thank you for the access, Colonel, she said, and for standing where you stood when it was easier to stand somewhere else. Thank you for making it impossible to stand anywhere else, he said. He paused. The program is going to change, not just because of the report, because of you being here, because 43 cadets watched something happen over 3 weeks that they are going to carry with them into every unit they ever lead. That's not in any report. That's just, he stopped. That's just true. She looked at him. She felt something in her chest that she identified as gratitude, and behind it something older and quieter that she identified as hope. Not the naive kind, the earned kind, the kind that survives having seen the real thing and decided in full knowledge of the cost to keep going anyway. Take care of your program, Colonel, she said. The real version of it, not the one that performed excellence, the one that builds it. He nodded. He extended his hand. She shook it. He held it a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and she let him because it was genuine, and genuine things deserve the time they took. She got in the car. She pulled out of the lot. She did not look in the rearview mirror because she was not that kind of person, and because Fort Benning was already becoming what everything eventually becomes when you leave it. Not a place anymore. A chapter. A weight you carry forward that makes you stronger for having carried it, even on the days it makes you slower. She drove for about 20 minutes in silence before her phone rang. She answered on speaker. It was DeLuca. You're on the road, one, he said. On the road, she confirmed. How are you? She thought about this question with the honest and complete attention she tried to bring to everything. She thought about her shoulder and the ache in it. She thought about the photograph in her duffel. She thought about Brennan's voice saying, I don't know what's underneath the performance. She thought about Elena Marsh, who had called a stranger's phone in the dark because she needed someone to tell her that what happened to her was real and mattered and was going to be part of the record. She thought about Wilder and Chu and Odom and Whitaker and all the ordinary specific ways that people choose decency when they could choose something easier, and how those choices accumulate over time into something you can call, without irony, the right side of things. She thought about David Brennan on a radio in Kunar Province in September 2014, afraid and doing it anyway, calling his people home by name until the end. I'm good, she said, and she meant it in all the ways it was possible to mean a thing. Not fine, not easy, not without cost, but good, grounded, real, carrying what she carried without putting it down because she had never put things down, and she was not going to start now. The secretary meeting is confirmed for the 22nd, DeLuca said. When you get back to Coronado, there's going to be a lot of people who want pieces of your time. There always are, she said. Reyna, his voice shifted. What you did out there, I want you to know. What you endured and then what you built from it. That doesn't happen without a specific kind of person, a specific kind of strength. He paused. I'm proud to know you. I just need you to know that. She was quiet for a moment. The road ran through Georgia, morning flat and straight and green on both sides, and the sun was coming up on her left in the particular way it rises in the south in April, slow and warm and certain. She thought about certainty, about the things you can be certain of after enough years of learning what costs what, and who is real and what actually matters when the darkness comes. I know, Ray, she said. I know. She ended the call. She drove. 2 hours outside Fort Benning, she stopped at a gas station. She filled the tank. She bought a coffee, hot this time, and stood beside the car in the morning air and drank it. A family crossed the parking lot nearby. A man, a woman, 2 small children. The younger child, a girl of maybe 4, was struggling with something in her hands, some small toy that wouldn't work the way she wanted it to, and she was working at it with the absolute total concentration that small children bring to mechanical problems, oblivious to everything else. The mother was watching her with an expression Reyna recognized as the specific love that is also a kind of awe, the love of watching someone small and new discover that persistence works. Reyna watched them for a moment, then she got back in the car. She put the coffee in the cup holder. She pulled back onto the highway. She thought about the secretary meeting on the 22nd. She thought about the cultural audit framework and what it would take to implement it across joint training commands, and how long it would take, and how much resistance it would meet, and how that resistance would have to be addressed, not once, but continuously, steadily, the way you address anything that the institution doesn't want to change, but that has to change anyway because the alternative is the thing you do not allow. She thought about the women whose complaints had not been filed, and the women who were filing them now, and the women who would come after them into programs that did not yet exist in the form they needed to exist in, but that were going to exist because she was going to be in the room when the decisions were made, and she was not going to leave that room until the decisions were right. She thought about all of it, and she was not overwhelmed by it. She was energized by it in the specific way that people are energized when the work in front of them is exactly the work they were made for. She drove west. The sun climbed. Georgia turned into Alabama. Alabama would turn into Mississippi, and then the country would open up into the long middle distances, and eventually she would be in California, back at Coronado, back in the rooms where her real life was lived and her real work was done. But she was carrying Fort Benning with her. She was carrying Brennan and Shue and Wilder and Whitaker and Elena Marsh and Patricia Odom and 43 cadets who had watched something happen over 3 weeks and who would never entirely forget what they saw. She was carrying the 8 words she had written 4 years ago in a classified report that nobody read, and that she was now going to spend the rest of her career saying out loud in every room she was in, to every person who needed to hear them. She was afraid, and she did it anyway. That was what courage was. That was what her father's generation had understood, and her own generation was still learning, and the next generation needed someone to teach them. Not the performance of fearlessness, not the monument built to manage grief, not the arrogance that mistakes the absence of self-knowledge for strength. The real thing, the specific human, costly, irreplaceable real thing. Being afraid, fully and honestly afraid, and doing it anyway because something else matters more. Because your people need you. Because the truth needs saying. Because someone has to hold on at the edge until the strength comes back, and then pull themselves up and stand there and look the darkness in the face and say, I am still here. Raina Thorne was still here. She was going to stay here. She was going to fight from here. She was going to build from here. And she was going to keep standing up every time she was pushed down, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned something on a rooftop in Georgia that she had in fact always known, but that had never been tested quite so plainly or confirmed quite so completely, that the ground is not where she belongs. She belongs standing. She has always belonged standing. And that is exactly where she remains.